It was 5:30 a.m. on December 17, 1944, in Hansfeld, Belgium. First, the engine of the Tiger tank coughed and sputtered, and suddenly it died. Joachim Peiper, the Obersturmbannführer of the SS, slammed his fist on the hatch of the turret, and the metallic explosion reverberated throughout the darkness of the pre-dawn hours. An effort was made by Unterscharführer Weber, the driver of the Maybach, to restart the engine that produced 700 horsepower. None of it. The fuel gauge indicated that there was no fuel present. "Herr Obersturmbannführer!" Weber yelled out from his compartment, his voice tense with a level of terror that was barely under control. "The reserve tank is also dry." Peiper descended from his command tank, his boots making a crunching sound as they landed on the freezing ground of Belgium. Around him, the most formidable armored spearhead that the Wehrmacht had amassed for Operation Watch on the Rhine, the Ardennes attack, remained inert. It consisted of 67 tanks, 149 half-tracks, and over 5,000 of Germany's most elite Waffen-SS men, all of whom were immobilized by empty fuel tanks. Peiper was able to make out the American position that had been abandoned in front of him through the early mist. Hansfeld was a vital supply depot for the 99th Infantry Division of the United States Army. The Americans had managed to go in such a short amount of time that they had left fires still blazing in oil drums and coffee still hot in metal cups. There, lined up like a gift from the god of war himself, stood rows upon rows of jerry cans, thousands of them, the characteristic olive-drab American fuel containers. In a manner that was almost respectful, Peiper approached carefully. This was done by his adjutant, Hauptsturmführer Hans Gruller, who opened one of the cans and sniffed it. As his troops began the frenetic process of replenishing their trucks, he remarked, "Benzene? Herr Obersturmbannführer. High-octane gasoline." Peiper counted as he made his way up and down the stack. The numbers were staggering, 50,000 gallons, which would be sufficient to feed his whole Kampfgruppe for the advance to the Meuse River, which would be sufficient to potentially alter the direction of the attack. Over the course of the previous half-year, the majority of German divisions had gotten more fuel than the Americans had left behind in this one ammunition store. A devastating reality came over Peiper as he stood among this treasure, watching his men load American fuel into German tanks. It was as if the morning fog had crept over him. In the event that the United States of America had the financial means to abandon such amounts, and if they were able to forsake what Germany would defend with whole divisions, then this war would have been finished. Not only had Germany made an error in calculation, but it had also made a fundamental misunderstanding of the character of its adversary. In the month of June 1944, 6 months prior to the discovery of Peiper at Hansfeld, Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments and War Production, had given the Führer with a report that should have instantly put a halt to all offensive activities. The production of synthetic fuel in Germany, which was the Wehrmacht's primary source of fuel, had been ruthlessly decimated by the bombing undertaken by the Allies. By September, the Leuna works had only managed to generate 5,000 tons of gasoline, despite the fact that they had produced 175,000 tons of fuel in April. A capacity of less than 10% was being utilized by the hydrogenation facilities located in the cities of Politz, Blechhammer, and Bruck. A tale of loss was given by the figures, which were unavoidable. A total of 1.8 billion barrels of crude oil were produced by the United States in the year 1944. Germany handled 33 million barrels, which is less than 2% of the total output in the United States. This includes all synthetic production, as well as fields that were taken from Romania. On the other hand, the United States was aiming to immerse its soldiers in an excess of petroleum, while the Third Reich was attempting to conduct mechanized combat with horse-drawn logistics. According to the calculations made by Major Friedrich Seemann of the Wehrmacht's Logistics Command, the Ardennes operation would require 4.5 million gallons of fuel in order to reach Antwerp. Hitler allotted 5 million gallons, but owing to transportation issues, Only half of those gallons were ultimately supplied. It was a tactic that demonstrated terminal weakness rather than strength on the part of the German High Command, which was staking the whole attack on seizing enemy supplies. In the meantime, the United States of America had built a petroleum pipeline system across France that was known as Pluto, which stands for Pipeline Under the Ocean. Additionally, they had established the Red Ball Express, which was a vast truck convoy system that carried 12,500 tons of supplies to the front lines every single day. By the end of December 1944, the level of gasoline use among American forces in Europe had reached 1.2 million gallons per day, while they were getting 1.4 million gallons. While the battle was going on, they were building up their reserves. Joachim Peiper was not stupid in any way. At the age of 29, he was one of the youngest regimental commanders in the Waffen-SS. He was also a veteran of the Eastern Front, where he had learnt that in contemporary combat, gasoline was more valuable than ammunition. He was also a holder of the Knight's Cross, with oak leaves and swords. He had been given the designation of Schwerpunkt, which meant that his Kampfgruppe would be the focal point of the whole Ardennes operation. Peiper was present at the last briefing that took place at Tondorf on the 14th of December, which was 2 days before the attack. General Sepp Dietrich, who commanded the 6th SS Panzer Army, stated in a straightforward manner, "You will have enough fuel to reach the Meuse if you capture American supplies." The fuel allotment for Kampfgruppe Peiper was 31,000 gallons, which was sufficient for 50 kilometers of combat activities. There was a distance of 65 kilometers to the Meuse. From the very beginning, the design involved the incorporation of the mathematical aspects of failure. As Peiper's column prepared to advance on December 16th, he issued stringent orders. Tanks were to run in single file in order to conserve fuel. Engines were to be cut off at any pause that lasted longer than 5 minutes, and the seizure of American fuel depots was the top priority, even more so than the achievement of tactical goals. Comparisons with activities carried out by the United States could not have been more striking. In the same morning, Captain James Rose of the United States 743rd Tank Battalion, who was stationed approximately 20 miles away from Peiper's starting position, wrote in his unit notebook, "Received fuel resupply, 8,000 gallons." The storage tanks are already near capacity, and this week's third cargo has arrived. The 16th of December, 1944, at 5:30 a.m. Within the span of just 2 hours, the German artillery bombardment that initiated Operation Watch on the Rhine consumed more ammunition than the Wehrmacht had allotted for the entirety of the operations that had been carried out earlier in the war. However, even this dazzling exhibition was able to conceal more serious deficiencies. Already running behind schedule, Peiper's column started moving at 7 o'clock in the morning. On German maps, the roads seemed to be highways. However, they were actually tiny rural lanes, and many of them were not paved. As a result of cars that were meant for the steppes of Russia having difficulty traversing the Ardennes woodland, traffic bottlenecks arose within a matter of hours. When they arrived at Lanzerath, which was Peiper's first objective, they were met with unanticipated resistance from a single American intelligence and reconnaissance platoon. This platoon consisted of 18 men who held up the most powerful German armored column for 7.5 hours. While the delay was in effect, Peiper's cars remained idle, wasting valuable fuel in the process. Peiper's column had traveled 20 kilometers and used 40% of their gasoline by the time they eventually broke through and arrived at Hansfeld the next morning, which was the 17th of December. Before they reached the halfway point to the Meuse, they would run out of water if they continued at this rate. It is not even accurate to say that the American supply depot at Hansfeld was a key facility. The United States Army classed it as a Class 3B depot, which signifies that it was a temporary petroleum station. It served as a forward supply post for the 99th Infantry Division. Despite this, Peiper discovered that the amount of gasoline at that place surpassed the monthly allowance for an entire German panzer division. After some time had passed, Hauptsturmführer Hans Gruller claimed that they discovered pyramids of jerry cans, each of which contained 5 gallons of gasoline. The height of the stack was 3 meters, and it extended for almost 200 meters. Despite the fact that the Americans had not even attempted to destroy them, the fuel that was taken was high-octane aviation gasoline, blended with motor fuel that had an octane rating of at least 80. Fuel with a 74-octane rating was intended for use in German vehicles, particularly the temperamental Maybach engines that were used in the Tiger tanks. In reality, the gasoline from the United States was of such high quality that it caused engine issues in a number of German automobiles. More discoveries were made by Piper's crew when they refueled their vehicles. Additionally, cargo manifests were discovered by Sergeant Wilhelm Hoffman at the depot office. Given that he had worked in his father's import company before to the war, he was able to read English effectively. According to the documents, this petroleum had been transported from Texas to New York, then further over the Atlantic to Liverpool, then across the Channel to Normandy, and last by truck to Hansfeld, which is located 400 miles away. Over 6,000 miles had been traveled in a span of time that was less than 6 weeks. In an interview that took place in 1976, Hoffman recalled that he had handed the papers over to Obersturmbannführer Piper. After he had finished reading them twice, he crumpled them up. He did not utter a single word, but his face became pale. Both of us were aware of the significance of this. During his search, Private Ernst Kara discovered a stack of Stars and Stripes newspapers that were just 2 days old and dated December 15th. There was a single pipeline that delivered more gasoline on a daily basis than Kampfgruppe Piper would utilize for the whole attack. The headline highlighted the opening of a new fuel pipeline that connects Cherbourg and Verdun. The pipeline had the capacity to transport 300,000 gallons of fuel per day. It is necessary to have an understanding of Germany's fuel position by the end of 1944 in order to realize the shock that Piper's finding caused. Allied bombardment has resulted in a 90% reduction in the production of synthetic gasoline since May. Because there was a shortage of aviation fuel, the Luftwaffe was forced to halt aircraft. The number of flying hours required for pilot training has been reduced from 250 to 60. For all intents and purposes, the surface fleet of the German Navy had finished its operations. This allowed U-boats to run on batteries for extended periods of time, which resulted in a reduction in diesel consumption. Since the year 1942, German people have not witnessed the sight of private car traffic on the home front. Due to the high value of gasoline, the Gestapo conducted investigations into the theft of individual liters from the black market. The use of horse-drawn plows was increasing among farmers. The United States of America was responsible for generating 67% of the world's oil at the time. There was more petroleum produced by the East Texas oil field than by all of Germany's conquered territories in Europe combined. Refineries in the United States were working at such a high capacity that Standard Oil was experimenting with novel petroleum byproducts, merely because they had an excess of crude. Piper's columns advanced after they were able to secure the 50,000 gallons that were secured at Hansfeld. By midday on the 17th of December, they had arrived in Bullingen, where they were able to seize further supplies, including rations, ammunition, and most crucially, maps that showed other American fuel stations in the region. However, the maps illuminated a worrisome reality. The United States of America had gasoline stocks all over the place. For every significant intersection, there was a depot. A stockpile of 3.5 million gallons was held by the United States First Army alone. Piper continued his advance into Ligneville, where his soldiers would carry out the massacre at Malmedy, which resulted in the deaths of 84 American POWs. There was a connection between this war crime and the fueling of despair. At a later time, Piper stated that he was unable to spare gasoline in order to transport inmates. Within the evening of the 17th of December, Piper's spearhead arrived at Stavelot, which was the location of a significant American gasoline storage that had more than 2 million gallons. Enough petrol was available here to ensure that we would arrive at the Meuse. Nevertheless, American engineers were already hard at work the moment the first German vehicles were getting closer. The Germans were getting closer, and Captain John Brewster of the 291st Engineer Combat Battalion had been given advance notice of their approach. His orders were straightforward. At whatever cost, prevent the adversary from obtaining gasoline. A total of 2,189,000 gallons of gasoline were stored in jerry cans in the Stavelot depot, which was spread out across 15 acres. The command was issued by Captain Brewster at 16:30 on the 17th of December, just as Piper's advanced guard was getting closer. The gasoline trails were poured by the engineers in between the stacks. On the other hand, white phosphorus grenades were dispersed. In the beginning, the grenade was thrown by Technical Sergeant Paul Solis. He remembers that the explosion occurred instantly and was of a huge magnitude. Within minutes, the whole depot was engulfed in flames. A wall of fire shot up, maybe 100 feet, described the witness. When the lead tanks belonging to Piper arrived, they discovered a column of dark smoke reaching 1,000 feet into the air. It would take 3 days for the fire to burn, and during that time it would use enough gasoline to power Piper's whole division all the way to Antwerp and back. The incident was reported by Unterscharführer Weber, who said, "The Obersturmbannführer stood on his tank turret, watching the flames. Probably for a period of 5 minutes, he remained silent. After that, he descended to the ground and informed me, 'They have the financial means to burn 2 million gallons in order to deny us access to them.' How come we are in this location? Engineers from the United States were attacking fuel dumps across the Ardennes rather than taking the chance of being captured. 1.1 million gallons were consumed by fire at Thieu. It was determined that 2.5 million gallons were lost at Spa. Over 8 million gallons were purposefully destroyed by the United States of America during the first week of the operation. This was more than Germany had allotted for the whole military endeavor. Having the capability to carelessly trash millions of liters was based in a supply chain that was beyond the grasp of the German society. Through the use of 6,000 vehicles that were operational around the clock, the Red Ball Express had successfully delivered 412,000 tons of goods. Day to day, each truck used 40 gallons of fuel. As a whole, the operation consumed more gasoline than the monthly supply of petroleum that German Army Group B received. 230 truck businesses that were operating on color-coded routes were engaged by the Motor Transport Service by the time December 1944 rolled around. 20,000 tons of goods, including 3,000 tons of gasoline, were supplied each day by the system. On the 18th of December, Colonel James Snyder, who is the Chief Logistics Officer for First Army, made the following recording. Fuel receipts yesterday, 1,847,000 gallons. 1,623,000 gallons of fuel were distributed. There was a net increase of 224,000 gallons to the reserves. The pipeline infrastructure was considerably more formidable than it already was. Pipes had been built across the English Channel as part of Operation Pluto, which allowed for the daily pumping of 1 million gallons from Britain. The interior region was covered by a network of pipes. On a daily basis, the Cherbourg-Paris line transported 800,000 gallons of liquid. The Seine line was responsible for the movement of 650,000 gallons. The Allied forces in Northwest Europe were drinking 7.5 million gallons of water every day by the end of December 1944, while they were obtaining 8.2 million gallons of water. It was during offensive operations that they were building up their reserves. On December 18th, as Piper continued to advance deeper into Belgium, it became abundantly evident that the German position was impossible to maintain. During the 3 hours of fighting that took place at Chenu, they were able to seize another depot that had 5,000 gallons. In combat, Tiger tanks used 2.5 liters of fuel for every mile traveled. Per mile, the Panthers consumed 1.5 liters of fuel. The challenging terrain of the Ardennes resulted in a 40% increase in usage. The maintenance officer for the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, Hauptsturmführer Otto Dingler made the following note. By noon on December 18th, we had consumed 67,000 gallons since the offensive began. We were able to collect around 55,000 gallons. During that time, we were operating at a loss. Piper's gasoline problem was known to the Americans, despite the fact that they were monitoring German radio communications through ultra-intercepts. The enemy is in a critical shortage of fuel. General Courtney Hodges issued an order to all of the forces. On the same day, American C-47s flew 316 missions to transport supplies to Bastogne, including 160,000 gallons of fuel. The aim of these missions was to destroy any gasoline reserves that were in danger of being captured. The United States of America was transporting more gasoline to a garrison that was surrounded than Piper's whole Kampfgruppe had under him. The gasoline shortage had reached a severe stage by the 19th of December, when Piper's men were engaged in combat with resistance at Stoumont. Rather than being abandoned due to damage sustained in combat, tanks were being abandoned with empty fuel tanks. Piper consolidated his remaining gasoline, which amounts to around 8,000 gallons. This is sufficient for either one engagement or one retreat, but not both. Meanwhile, Allied planners were getting ready for activities that would take place in January. In order to meet his needs for the upcoming month, Brigadier General Morris Gilland needed 245 million gallons. A decision was made to grant the request without any debate. There was a difference that went beyond the quantity. Standards were established for the efficiency of American automobiles. While the Tiger tanks consumed 2.5 gallons each mile, the Sherman tanks only used 0.8 gallons. Fully loaded, American trucks achieved a mileage of 8 miles per gallon. The components could be switched out, which made maintenance much easier. There was a confusing assortment of seized and produced vehicles that were operated by German soldiers, each of which had particular requirements. Tanks from France required a different kind of oil than German Panthers did. Compared to German Opels, Soviet trucks required a distinct set of components. The logistical challenges were increased by each additional problem. Piper was informed by radio on the 20th of December that an Allied aircraft had resulted in the destruction of a fuel convoy. There is no hope of replenishment. Piper gathered his commanders together and instructed them to preserve the resources that were available. In a straightforward manner, Sturmbannführer Werner Pochke stated, "We have fuel for approximately 20 kilometers. The distance to the Meuse is 30 kilometers." The testimony of Hauptsturmführer Gruller states that the Obersturmbannführer made the following statement. "Gentlemen, we have discovered that we are fighting an enemy who burns more fuel to deny it to us than we received for this entire operation. What we were able to record at Hansfeld, which appeared to be a miracle, represented nothing to them. We are unable to prevail." This insight was becoming more widespread. In a subsequent letter, General Hasso von Manteuffel, who commanded the 5th Panzer Army, stated, "When I learned that the Americans had destroyed 8 million gallons rather than risk our capturing it, I knew that the offensive had failed before it even began." At the time of his capture on December 23rd, Colonel Friedrich von der Heydte was quoted as saying to interrogators, "Your soldiers throw away chocolate. Chocolate has not been seen by my men in the past 2 years. Millions of gallons are consumed by you. The liter is the unit of measurement that we use. How can we overcome such a plentiful supply?" When the 21st of December arrived, Piper was besieged at L'Église, and his tanks were unable to move. There was a total gasoline allotment of 340,000 gallons for the 21st of December alone for the American troops that were around him, which included the 31st Infantry Division, the 82nd Airborne, and the 3rd Armored. Piper had around 1,000 gallons. In a letter that he sent home, Private First Class Richard McKinney stated, "We have Germans surrounded who have run out of gas. When it comes to boiling coffee, our captain quips that we use more fuel than they have for those tanks." The American reaction was a classic example of industrial warfare at its most advanced level. Patton's Third Army's pivot north required 350,000 gallons simply for redeployment, which was believed unachievable by German standards, but was completed in 3 days. There was no cloud cover on the 23rd of December. There were 2,000 sorties flown by Allied aircraft, and each one used fuel at a rate that would have caused the Luftwaffe to be grounded for many weeks. P-47s had an hourly consumption rate of 300 gallons. Each hour, B-26s consumed 200 gallons of fuel. A single day's worth of air operations devoured more than the whole offensive allotment that Germany had available. Piper abandoned his cars and fled on foot on the evening of December 23rd and 24th, which was just after midnight. Out of the 119 tanks and assault weapons that were used to launch the onslaught, 39 were still functioning but were rendered inoperable. These were eliminated using the ammo that was still available. The scenario was reported by Oberleutnant Heinz Goes, who said, "We drained the last fuel from all vehicles, which was probably about 200 gallons in total." Personal destruction of his command tank was carried out by the Obersturmbannführer. Empty gasoline tanks were responsible for the destruction of equipment worth millions of Reichsmarks. Approximately 770 of the 5,000 soldiers who had initially joined Kampfgruppe Piper returned to their homes. They had made progress of 60 miles, taken control of many depots, and uncovered the truth about the supplies of the Allied forces. The German headquarters received the news of Piper's discoveries shortly after they were made. The reports on the American supplies that were taken captive were delivered to Field Marshal Walter Model on the 26th of December. His chief of staff took a recording of Model's reaction, which read as follows. The Field Marshal read the quantities twice. 50,000 gallons at Hansfeld, 2 million burned at Stavelot, and 8 million destroyed rather than captured. We are not fighting the same war. He stated that we are not. On the 28th of December, Hitler was told, but he refused to accept reality. Hitler maintained that the statistics were propaganda, according to what Speer wrote. After being shown images of Stavelot being burned, he claimed that it was Hollywood effects. Nonetheless, lesser levels knew what was going on. This is what Gefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann wrote to his wife. The United States of America wastes more fuel every day than we receive in a month. They march while driving tanks as we do. This conflict is beyond hope. The gasoline crisis was really only a symptom of a much greater problem. A new aircraft was made every 5 minutes, a ship was constructed every day, and a tank was produced every 7 minutes by the United States of America by the year 1944. The numbers about the production of petroleum were staggering. The United States produced 1.8 billion barrels. The Soviet Union produced 110 million barrels. Germany produced 33 million barrels, including synthetic, and Japan produced 2.6 million barrels. Less than 2% of the petroleum that was produced in the United States was produced by the Axis powers combined. Each and every significant German attack that took place after 1942 was hampered by a lack of gasoline. Every American offensive was backed by a wealth of resources that it was impossible for German planners to imagine. On the 27th of December, Lieutenant Colonel Chester Hansen documented an event that was extremely illuminating. A logistics officer reported that the weather had reduced fuel deliveries to only 500,000 gallons daily. Not until someone pointed out that this surpassed Germany's whole offensive allotment did there arise any cause for alarm. The American waste was more shocking to German prisoners of war from the Ardennes than the American firepower. Seeing soldiers throw away meals that had only been partially consumed or burn fuel for heating was more detrimental to morale than artillery. We knew your production numbers in an abstract sense, but seeing soldiers waste more than we possessed made them real, Oberst Georg Reichel said to the interrogators. Each and every German who witnessed your casual plenty was aware that the war was fruitless. Despite the fact that letters were censored, this information circulated far and wide. Americans wash their clothes in gasoline, Feldwebel Ernst Müller pointed out in his writing. Canines are given chocolate as a treat. During the Christmas season, they discharge artillery. We are unable to challenge infinity. German myths of racial supremacy were damaged as a result of the psychological consequences. What was the rationale behind the decadent Americans' possession of such wealth while the master race struggled to meet their basic needs? Throughout the Nuremberg trials, German authorities often highlighted logistics, notably gasoline, as the one factor that ultimately determined the outcome. During his testimony, Field Marshal Keitel stated from 1940 to 1941, "We had operational superiority. Due to a lack of gasoline, we were unable to move our forces by the year 1944, while the Americans maneuvered their army like chess pieces." During his trial for the slaughter at Malmedy, Piper provided testimony that was extremely revealing. He stated, "Every decision after December 17th was influenced by fuel shortage. This prevented us from successfully maneuvering, pursuing, or retreating. While we were counting leaders, Americans were free to go about." According to a letter written by General Heinz Guderian, the war was over when Piper captured 50,000 gallons, which meant everything to him but nothing to Americans. Because it depicts the time when industrial warfare came to an end, the narrative has a strong resonance. The figures of production, not the bravery of the warriors, were what won the wars. It was in the Ardennes, among empty gasoline tanks, that the romantic concept of battle was put to rest. According to the calculations of Dr. Richard Overy, by 1944, the ratio of Allied to Axis output had surpassed 5.1 in important areas. It was close to 50.1 in the petroleum industry. Despite having greater training and strategies, these advantages were not able to be overcome. While Germany manufactured 119,907 aircraft throughout the war, the United States produced 324,750. The United States of America produced 80,410 tanks, whereas Germany produced 46,157. In 1944 alone, the United States of America processed 1.8 billion barrels of oil, whereas Germany managed to gather together 33 million barrels. This is the most revealing statistic. December 24, 1944 was the date. As Piper's forces made their way through American lines on foot, they abandoned 177 vehicles, including 39 tanks, 70 half-tracks, and other vehicles. The gravity of the situation became clear. It appeared as though they had miraculously caught 50,000 gallons, but they later discovered that it was of little use against an adversary who could burn millions of gallons. The following is a reflection that Unterscharführer Weber made in 1975. "That morning at Hansfeld, we celebrated like we had won the lottery by discovering American fuel. As dusk approached, we were aware of the burning of Stavelot, and we realized that we had already lost. The United States of America has so much that they could ruin what we would die to have." There was a rounding mistake in the daily consumption of the Allies, which resulted in the amount of 50,000 gallons being less than what a single American armored division used in 2 days. It was also less than what the Red Ball Express burnt in 3 hours. In a subsequent letter, Major General J. Lawton Collins stated, "The Germans' desperate attempts to capture fuel revealed their miscalculation. They believed that we placed the same importance on gasoline as they did, considering it to be irreplaceable. They were unable of comprehending that we had so much that we could waste millions of dollars rather than risk being at a strategic disadvantage." Due to the unchangeable mathematics of industrial warfare, Operation Watch on the Rhine was unsuccessful because of its failure. The attack used roughly 2.8 million gallons, which is 40% of the total allocation. This includes the difference from the supplies that were taken. 277 million gallons were used by the United States of America over the same time period. Wehrmacht suffered losses of 100,000 soldiers, 800 tanks, and 1,000 aircraft. The loss of illusions, however, was the most heartbreaking aspect. The realization that Germany was not fighting a war, but rather taking part in its own execution was apparent to any German who seen the plenty of the United States. Despite his survival, Joachim Piper was incarcerated for war crimes until the year 1956. Unidentified attackers carried out the murder of the victim at his residence in France on July 14, 1976. In spite of this, he mentioned to historian Henry Lehman in 1967 that finding that depot was the worst thing. We may have been able to leave with dignity if we had ran out of resources earlier. Our findings, on the other hand, revealed that the Americans had Cs while we had drops. We made a discovery that was impossible. When it comes to industrial warfare, logistics is more important than tactics. This lesson is applicable beyond World War II. The production process undermines bravery. Having an abundance is more than enough. It may be argued that the German soldier of 1944 had greater experience and had received superior training. The fact was irrelevant. The United States of America was supported by an industrial machine that had the capacity to squander more items than Germany could generate. Each and every jerry can at Hansfeld, each and every gallon that was burnt at Stavelot, and each and every pipeline that stretched throughout France contained this fact. In the event of a conflict between industrial nations, factories and refineries would emerge victorious, rather than great generals. During the month of December in 1944, Colonel Trevor Dupuy determined that each American soldier was provided with 67 pounds of supplies on a daily maintenance basis. Every single German was given 3 pounds. Waste was a source of complaint for Americans. According to Germans, the amount of garbage produced in the United States is unfathomably abundant. Veterans groups met in La Glaise in 1984, 40 years after the fight had taken place. Piper's Tiger tank is on exhibit at the museum, and it is still in the same location it was in when it ran out of gasoline on December 23, 1944. Former Untersturmführer Karl Wortmann and former Staff Sergeant Roy Anderson of the 30th Infantry Division were seen standing next to the tank after it had been destroyed. "We have always been curious about the reason you stopped," Anderson stated. "We believed that it was a strategic move," Wortmann said with a sour laugh. "We came to a halt because the tanks were depleted. To conceal it from us, you burnt millions of dollars. How are we going to combat that?" After some silence, Anderson finally spoke up and stated, "We had no idea you were that short. We were so blessed that we never gave it a second thought." It was that interaction that encapsulated the realities of December 1944. On one side, the gallon is the unit of measurement, while on the other, millions. One of them struggled over each jerry can, while the other one set fire to C's. It was impossible to predict the outcome. Incriminating evidence can be found in German documents. In December of 1944, the War Journal of Army Group B reads, "The offensive starts on the 16th of December. Fuel 70% of the minimum. Piper is able to collect 50,000 gallons on the 17th of December. On the 18th of December, many stores were destroyed. Moreover, 5 million gallons were wasted. The 19th of December. Fuel is essential and units are immobilized. By the 24th of December, Piper has abandoned automobiles. Expiration of the fuel? While this is going on, First Army reports, 3.7 million gallons are reserved as of the 16th of December. On the 17th of December, 2.2 million were destroyed. On the 18th of December, 1.8 million were received. On December 24th, there were 4.1 million reserves. The Germans saved their attention for individual cans, whereas the Americans treated millions with apathy. American petroleum was not only greater in quantity, but it also signified technological supremacy. The catalytic cracking process was pioneered by American refineries, which resulted in higher octanes being produced more effectively than German hydrogenation. Aircraft that were powered by American aviation fuel with 100 octane had a performance edge over German aircraft that were powered by synthetic fuel with 87 octane. Tetraethyl lead, ethylene, and dibramide detergents were all additives that the United States of America mastered that Germany was unable to imitate. It was common for German engines, which were intended for poorer grade, to perform badly when using seized American gasoline. Every single soldier's experience was influenced by the lack of fuel. On December 20th, Gefreiter Hans Muller made the following recording. Marched 30 kilometers. there is no gasoline available for trucks. American automobiles that had been abandoned and had their engines running for warmth were passed. They do not allow the engines to quit. Our march was made in the snow. There was a severe lack of medical care. Ambulances were unable to transport injured patients. Generators were unable to be driven by hospitals. Men lost their lives while waiting for transportation that never arrived. Dr. Wilhelm Kirsting, the Oberarzt, said that although we had outstanding surgeons and supplies that were taken from the Americans, we did not have any gasoline for the ambulances. A trip of 10 kilometers may have prevented the deaths of those who could have been spared. German propaganda to the effect that the United States was weak was smashed by the discovery. It was conveyed to the soldiers that the Americans were weak and unable. Next, they found out that the United States of America had the ability to destroy more than Germany did. The following entry was found in Goebbels' notebook on December 28th. Reports indicate serious morale problems. The soldiers write about the dominance of the United States, which undermines our narrative. However, tales travel more quickly than censorship. It was impossible for the tale of German dominance to endure when it came into face with American logistics. In light of the Ardennes defeat, Germany was left with no other choice except to resort to desperate resistance. During the Nuremberg proceedings, General Jodl said that after the Ardennes, we knew it was lost. Now that we had played our final card, we found out that the adversary had all of the aces. Aware of the desperation of the Germans, the Allies concentrated their efforts on disrupting fuel production. The manufacture of gasoline in Germany came to an end in February of 1945. There was a grounding of the Luftwaffe. There will be no training. As a result of being decimated piecemeal by mobile adversaries, the Wehrmacht became immobile. In the spring of 1945, bizarre scenes were seen. The immobility of German forces was the cause of their capitulation, not defeat. At the same time that the Allies drove by, whole panzer divisions sat motionless. Lieutenant General Fritz Bayerlein provided the following description. We had 42 operational tanks, experienced crews, and ammunition. With only 300 gallons of petrol, we were unable to make it to the next town. We were able to walk to our captors after we destroyed our tanks. The only thing that slowed down the progress of the United States was the congestion caused by the number of vehicles. By itself, the Third Army possessed 15,000 vehicles. The gasoline crisis that occurred with Kampfgruppe Piper exemplifies how the capabilities of the industrial sector affected the fate of World War II. In the morning of December, while Piper was standing amid the seized jerry cans, he saw a glimpse of the truth. They had battled an adversary whose waste was more than what they required. Everything is revealed by the numbers. There are 5 million gallons allocated for the German attack. A total of 8 million gallons of fuel was destroyed by Americans. The daily use in the United States is 7.5 million gallons. At Hansfeld, Piper was able to seize 50,000 gallons, which is equivalent to 0.6% of the daily supply in the United States. The Battle of the Bulge resulted in the deaths of around 100,000 Germans and 19,000 Americans. The final reserves of the Wehrmacht were annihilated by it. On the other hand, its long-lasting influence was the dissemination of information across the ranks of Germans. The United States held an immense quantity. The revelation made by Piper was not just about fuel, but also concerning the nature of industrial warfare. The one who produced the most petroleum, steel, and aluminum was the one who gained victory. There was never any prospect for Germany. The final irony is that American forces located 39 perfect tanks that had been abandoned solely due to a lack of fuel while they were cataloging abandoned German equipment at La Glaise. The salvage report written by Major Robert Harrison highlighted the following. Fuel required 8,000 gallons. The classification is irrelevant. A local reserve is the source. The time is 4 hours. What was hard for the Germans to achieve, 8,000 gallons to save their finest tanks, was not noticed by the Americans. It was a tiny request that needed to be made, utilizing local reserves that exceeded the peak strength of Kampfgruppe Piper. This was the revelation that Piper made at Hansfeld. Not only did the United States have more gasoline, but the availability of fuel in the United States worked on a scale that rendered the shortage of fuel in Germany meaningless. As soon as the United States' industrial potential began to mobilize, the war was ended. That which had been known to be true since 1942 was disclosed by Hansfeld. Germany battled the impossible, counting their failure in gallons, while the United States counted their victory in ocean pounds. The Tiger tank is a memorial to the time when tactical skill met logistical realities and resulted in a loss. It is currently parked at the Museum of l'Église, with the fuel gauge empty. The visitors are curious as to why such strong tanks were left behind. The response is that there is no fuel.